Welcome to this deep dive, crafted specifically for you. Today, we're diving headfirst into the really electrifying world of electronic and dance music genres.
Yeah, it's a huge landscape.
It really is. We're going to break down some key terms, electronic music, dance music, even EDM, figure out what they actually mean, and uncover some, well, pretty surprising historical roots that go way further back than you might think.
That's right. For this deep dive, we've really dug into a comprehensive analysis that meticulously charts the evolution of these sounds. It takes us from those often experimental avant-garde beginnings right up to the fundamental rhythms that still get us moving today.
Exactly. So our mission here is to give you a really clear, hopefully engaging grasp of this huge sonic world. We want to highlight the crucial developments, that fascinating interplay between technology, culture, and just that basic human urge to dance.
Without getting bogged down in too much jargon.
Right, hopefully no jargon overload. Get ready for maybe a few aha moments as we start connecting the dots. Okay, let's get into it. To start, what are we actually talking about here? Like, what's the fundamental difference between electronic music and dance music? And where does this term EDM fit in?
That's definitely the place to start. So electronic music, that's the really big umbrella term. Think of it as any music that at its core relies on electronic instruments, circuits, or digital tech for its creation.
Okay, so pretty broad.
Very broad. And what's interesting is its initial purpose wasn't necessarily about dancing at all. It really grew out of avant-garde artistic exploration, people pushing boundaries with new technology.
Like those really early, strange instruments.
Exactly. Things like the Theremin, the Ondes, Martenot, and then later, these revolutionary techniques like Musique, Concrète, manipulating recorded sounds.
Which sounds kind of like early sampling, right?
It absolutely paved the way for sampling culture, yeah. And then you had electronic music in Germany, which was more about building sounds entirely from scratch with electronics.
Right, so that's the experimental art music side. Then dance music, or club music that feels a bit more straightforward. Music for dancing.
Precisely. The emphasis shifts entirely. It becomes functional. It's all about the rhythm, those driving beats, the structures that physically make you want to move.
Built for clubs, for DJs?
Yeah, typically designed for continuous play by DJs. And, you might hear people use club music for maybe more underground sounds, while EDM often gets tagged onto the bigger festival stuff.
Okay, which brings us to EDM, electronic dance music. This is where it feels a little contentious sometimes, maybe.
It can be, yeah. EDM is definitely a subset of electronic music, specifically designed for dancing and for DJs to mix. It covers a lot of house, techno, trance, all that.
But the term itself has a history.
It really does. These genres existed long before the term EDM became popular. But the American music industry really latched onto it in the early 2010s. It was sort of a rebranding effort, wasn't it, to commercialize the U.S. rave scene.
Right, making it more mainstream friendly.
Exactly. Armada music has a simple definition. All music produced electronically for people to dance to. But like we said, you often hear distinctions made. Club music for current underground stuff, EDM, sometimes just for the big commercial hits. Some people even call EDM a subgenre of electronica.
So that rise in popularity also led to some debate within the scene, I imagine?
Oh, yeah. Discussions about authenticity, commercialization versus artistic integrity.
Yeah.
That definitely happened.
It's fascinating how the term EDM itself mirrors that journey from underground scenes to massive mainstream success.
It absolutely does. Early electronic music was often pretty niche, experimental, even academic. Dance music emerged as the function became clear, making people move. And then EDM, as a popular term, really aligns with those huge festivals and chart dominance. It's a marker of commercial growth as much as anything else.
So fundamentally, it sounds like we've got the split right from the start, exploring sound versus making people dance.
That's a really key way to look at it. Of course, the lines blurred, they influenced each other constantly, but that core difference in artistic goal sonic exploration versus rhythmic function really shaped this incredibly diverse landscape we have today.
Okay, definitions sorted. Now let's jump in the time machine. Way back. Before the clubs, before the synths we know today, what were the very first sparks? The precursors.
Oh, it starts way earlier than most people think. Late 19th, early 20th century, really. You've got these incredible foundational experiments, like Thaddeus Cahill's Telharmonium around 1897.
The Telharmonium, right, that huge thing.
Massive. Trying to synthesize and distribute music electrically over wires. Imagine the road crew for that thing.
Seriously, a whole power station just for one gig.
And then you had thinkers like the Italian Futurists, Luigi Russolo's Art of Noises Manifesto in 1913, Ferruccio Busoni talking about machine sounds, microtones. They were really pushing the idea of what music could be.
So more conceptual philosophical shifts first. When did the actual instruments start showing up?
The 1920s and 30s were key for that. That's when we got the Theremin, the Ondes Martenot, the Trautonium. These instruments offered completely new sounds, new ways to perform.
And were they used for dance music then?
Not really, no. They were mostly picked up by avant-garde composers exploring new sonic worlds, pushing away from traditional harmony and rhythm.
Okay, then the big one, post-World War II, magnetic tape.
A total game changer. Suddenly you could record and manipulate sound. This led directly to Musique Concrète in France. Schaeffer, Henry, taking everyday sounds and twisting them into compositions.
And wasn't there something even earlier in Egypt?
Yes. Halim Eldab's The Expression of Czar from 1944. Incredible piece of tape music, possibly the earliest. And at the same time in Germany, you had electronic music, generating sounds purely from electronics.
So these techniques manipulating recordings, synthesizing sounds, they were the building blocks, even if the music wasn't dance-focused yet.
Absolutely fundamental building blocks.
Yeah.
Sound manipulation, synthesis, layering sounds, all techniques that would become crucial for dance music production later on. Just the act of recording and changing sound,
Yeah.
it altered everything.
What about the 60s? Did things start moving towards rhythm then?
Things kept expanding. Early computer music started appearing, live electronic performances, Japanese instruments making an impact globally. But crucially for our story, the late 60s brought Jamaican dub music.
Ah, dub. That feels like a really important connection.
Hugely important. Dub artists were deconstructing reggae tracks, stripping them down, focusing intensely on the bass and drums, and using the studio itself as an instrument. Tons of reverb delay.
Studio effects as part of the composition.
Exactly. Those techniques are absolutely foundational for so much dance music production.
Sure.
And around the same time, you also had bands like Silver Apples in the U.S. who were making electronic music specifically intended for dancing. That's a noticeable shift in intent.
The technology is getting smaller, more accessible. Synthesizers, drum machines.
All right. And culturally, you have discotheques, club culture bubbling up. There's a growing demand for music you can move to.
And I guess debates started then too. Art music versus pop music.
Oh, yeah. Those early philosophical discussions about what electronic sound meant for music versus popular, experimental versus functional for dancing, they really set the stage for genre distinctions that persist even now.
Okay, early sparks covered. Now for the main event, maybe. The 70s and 80s. This is where it feels like the core genres really burst into life. Disco, synth-pop, electro-funk, house, techno.
Yeah, this period was the real crucible, where those foundational rhythms were forged.
Let's start with disco. You called it the dance floor blueprint. Why was it so fundamental?
Disco, popping up in the early 70s, was just transformative. It came out of the gay and black club scenes in New York, Philadelphia, and it was way more than just music. It was a whole cultural movement.
And it really set the template for dance music.
Absolutely. Its main goal was simple: make people dance. And it used electronic rhythms, drum machines, synths, in a really new, infectious way to achieve that. While the avant-garde was off exploring soundscapes, disco was laser-focused on the dance floor experience.
And it changed how we listen too, right? The whole DJ culture aspect.
Definitely. Disco really professionalized DJing. Techniques we take for granted now: beat matching, mixing records seamlessly with two turntables to keep the energy constant that largely came out of disco clubs.
And the tech was cutting edge for the time.
Totally. Giorgio Moroder working with Donna Summer, I Feel Love in '77. That track's backing is almost entirely synthesized. Mind-blowing for the time.
A landmark.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even earlier, George McRae's Rock Your Baby from '74 used an early roll and rhythm machine. And don't forget the 12-inch single. Those extended instrumental mixes were made specifically for DJs.
Giving them more room to work. So disco set the stage. Sound, DJing, format. But then there was that backlash. Disco sucks.
Yeah, the Disco Demolition Night in '79 was the peak of that backlash in the U.S. But kind of ironically, that pushback helped drive innovation underground.
How so?
As disco faded from the mainstream charts, the records, the spirit, it all lived on in underground clubs, especially in Chicago and New York, often in those same marginalized communities where it started. DJs there started messing with the disco formula.
Changing it up.
Yes, stripping tracks down, adding heavier drum machine beats, making it more mechanical, less overtly pop. This whole process of deconstructing and reconstructing disco, that was the direct precursor to house music.
Wow. So even as it was supposedly dying, it was actually morphing into the next big thing. What are disco's key legacies then?
The embrace of synths and drum machines in popular music, DJ mixing as a performance art, and the nightclub as this vital community hub, All of that flows directly from disco into modern dance music.
Okay, from disco's blueprint, let's jump to synth-pop. The new wave of electronic sound. This was happening around the same time, late 70s.
Yeah, late 70s, maybe 1977 to 1980s when it really solidified.
Yeah.
Big scenes in West Germany, Japan, the UK. It was a huge part of the new wave movement, and obviously the synthesizer was front and center, often the only instrument.
And the early sound. It was different from disco, right? Maybe a bit colder, moodier.
That's a good way to put it. Early synth pop often gets described as eerie, sterile, sometimes menacing. The lyrics often dealt with themes like isolation, technology, alienation.
But it evolved.
Oh yeah. Moving into the early 80s, it generally got warmer, catchier, more conventionally pop, and definitely incorporated more danceable rhythms.
What were the big influences feeding into synth-pop?
A real melting pot.
Yeah.
German krautrock rock bands like Kraftwerk were massive. Autobahn was huge. Electronic art musicians like Jean-Michel Jarre, Vangelis, Eurodisco, especially Mortar again. Even David Bowie's Berlin work with Brian Eno.
And Japan was important too, to mention.
Crucial. Yellow Magic Orchestra, YMO. They had such a unique sound, and they were really early adopters of tech, like the Roland TR-808 drum machine and digital sampling.
Right.
Way ahead of the curve.
So YMO, Kraftwerk. Who else defines synth-pop?
Gary Newman, huge hits with Our Friends Electric and Cars. The Human League, Don't You Want Me was massive. OMD, Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark with Enola Gay, Depeche Mode, Eurythmics, Sweet Dreams, classic. This sound was a direct influence on house and techno.
It also feels like synth-pop made making music maybe easier, more accessible.
Definitely. Because it leaned so heavily on electronics, you didn't necessarily need years of traditional musical training. It had a bit of that punk DIY spirit. Anyone could potentially get a synth and start experimenting.
Kind of foreshadowing the bedroom producer phenomenon.
Absolutely. And just like disco, you see that pattern. Starts underground, a bit experimental, then gets refined, becomes commercially huge. We see that again later with house, with dubstep. It's a common cycle.
Okay, next up, electro-funk and early hip-hop, rhythmic innovations. How did these two connect?
Early 80s, electro-funk, or just electro emerges. It's this really vital bridge between funk music and the electronic sounds bubbling up. And it's totally intertwined with the birth of hip-hop.
Where did it come from?
Kind of simultaneously in a few places. Japan, certainly Ryuichi Sakamoto's Riot and Lagos from 1980 is an early touchstone. But also New York, Detroit, it was this fusion of funk, early hip-hop grooves, New York boogie, and those electronic pop sounds from Germany and Japan, Kraftwerk, YMO again.
And the TR-808 drum machine, central here too.
Absolutely fundamental.
Yeah.
That booming 808 kick, the crisp snares and claps. That is the sound of early electro for many people. Plus, you often had processed vocals, vocoders, talk boxes, giving it that futuristic, robotic kind of feel.
Who were the key artists driving electro?
Afrika Bambaataa is massive. Planet Rock from 1982, produced with Arthur Baker and John Roby. It's iconic. Sampled Kraftwerk became an anthem in both electro and hip-hop scenes.
A foundational track.
Totally. Also groups like Warp 9 doing sci-fi, Afrofuturist themes, Ashin Zal Nafish, the soul. Electro's influence spread wide into Detroit techno, ghetto tech, breakbeat, drum and bass.
And the hip-hop connection, how did that work alongside electro?
Well, at the same time electro was taking off, early hip-hop culture was solidifying. DJ Kool Herc in the Bronx, breakbeat DJing. The TR-808 and sampling became cornerstones of hip-hop production very quickly. Electro-funk is really where you see Black American musical traditions actively grabbing hold of these new electronic tools.
So pioneered by Black artists using new tech.
Exactly. And that futuristic sound palette was absolutely crucial for what came next, especially in Detroit with techno.
That mention of Afrofuturism seems important too.
It really is. It wasn't just about cool sounds. There were thematic links being drawn between the music, technology, science fiction, imagining alternative futures. These tracks often carried undertones of empowerment, which really resonated later in Detroit.
Okay, foundation lead. Now, house music. The Chicago sound. This feels like a major watershed moment.
It absolutely is. House music emerging in the early 80s, primarily from these vibrant, often marginalized communities in U.S. cities. It's a fundamental shift, driven by DJ innovation, accessible tech, and this incredibly strong sense of community.
And Chicago is ground zero.
Unquestionably. Early 80s Chicago. It evolved directly from the city's underground club scene. DJs were taking disco records, messing with them, making them more mechanical, repetitive, really focusing on the rhythm track.
And the Warehouse Club. Frankie Knuckles.
Legendary. The Warehouse opened 77 to 82, primarily serving black and gay crowds, with Frankie Knuckles as the resident DJ. It's central to the story. The name house music likely comes from people asking for the track's knuckles played at the warehouse.
So these clubs were more than just places to dance.
Oh, absolutely. They were safe havens, spaces for self-expression, community building for African American and LGBTQ plus people who face discrimination elsewhere.
Yeah.
That energy is baked into the music.
And you mentioned Garage House happening around the same time in New York and New Jersey.
Right, Garage House, or just Garage, developed alongside Chicago House. Key figures are Larry Levin at the Paradise Garage in New York, Tony Humphries at Club Zanzibar in New Jersey.
How did Garage sound different from Chicago House?
Generally, Garage is seen as deeper, more soulful. It kept a stronger connection to R&B and gospel vocals, more of that melodic richness from disco, sometimes less rigidly four on the floor, maybe more syncopated. Some argue Garage actually came together slightly before Chicago House really codified.
Interesting. So regional variations right from the start. How did this music spread beyond those cities?
Pretty quickly, actually. First to other U.S. cities, then across the Atlantic. London and Ibiza became massive hubs in Europe.
Yeah.
And the influences were broad disco, obviously, but also high NRG, electro, synth-pop, boogie dub, jazz, even post-punk. DJs like Knuckles and Ron Hardy had really eclectic tastes.
What makes a track sound like house? What are the core sonic elements?
Okay, key things. Tempo usually sits between 115 and 130 BPM. Rhythmically, it's that defining four-on-the-floor kick drum pattern, kick on every beat. Snare or clap, usually on beats 2 and 4, and those distinctive offbeat hi-hats.
And the gear.
Early on, it was all about affordable gear. Roland drum machines, the TR-808, 909, 707, synths like the Roland TB-303, the Juno series, Jupiter. Samplers became crucial for grabbing vocal hits, percussion loops, bits from other records.
Yeah.
Prominent, often deep, rolling, or pulsating. Melody and harmony, varied soulful vocals and jazzy chords in deep or garage, more abstract synth lines and acid, minimal stuff in tech house later on. Classic house piano chords like Marshall Jefferson used are iconic.
And the overall feeling.
Often very uplifting, euphoric, soulful. It really aimed to create this communal atmosphere on the dance floor. Early house lyrics often talked about peace, love, unity, self-expression. House is a feeling, as the saying goes.
And house quickly fractured into subgenres, right? Chicago, acid, deep, garage. Can you break those down a bit?
Sure. Chicago House is the original raw, minimal production, heavy on the 808, KD99s, direct groove, sometimes that raw gospel soul's edge, that jacking dance style.
Okay. Then acid house.
Acid House also started in Chicago, mid-80s. It's defined by that sound, these squelchy, resonant filter sweeps of the Roland TB-303 bass line synth. Repetitive, hypnotic, almost trance-inducing. Often use samples or spoken word instead of sung vocals. Futures, Acid Tracks from '87 is the key record. It absolutely exploded in the UK.
The second summer of love.
Exactly. Huge cultural phenomenon there. Then Deep House.
More mellow.
Yeah, often traced to Larry Heard, a.k.a. Mr. Fingers. Tracks like Mystery of Love, Can You Feel It?
Mm-hmm.
Generally slower tempo, maybe 110, 125 BPM. Muted, rolling bass lines, spacious 909 percussion, soft keyboard pads, complex, often jazz-influenced chords. Soulful vocals are common. It's atmospheric, sometimes melancholic, hypnotic, jazzy.
And finally, garage house again.
Right, the NY&J sound. Paradise Garage, Club Zanzibar. More overtly soulful R&B gospel vocals are key here. Prominent piano riffs, it stays closer to its disco roots. The rhythm might be a bit more broken or syncopated compared to the strict four on the floor of Chicago House.
It's amazing how distinct these sounds became so quickly, driven by specific producers and DJs, I guess.
Absolutely. A core group of innovators really defined these sounds.
Who are the absolute must-know pioneers from that early house era?
Okay, Chicago. Frankie Knuckles, the Godfather. Ron Hardy, another hugely influential DJ. Jesse Saunders, often credited with the first house record, On and On. Marshall Jefferson, known for bringing piano into house. Larry Heard, Mr. Fingers for Deep House. DJ Pierre and his group Future for Acid House. Also Chip E., Farley Jackmaster Funk, Steve Silk Hurley. So many key players.
And New York, New Jersey. The garage side.
Larry Levan at Paradise Garage is legendary. Tony Humphries at Zanzibar. Todd Terry was a master sampler. Kerry Chandler, known for his deep, soulful garage sound. And masters at work, Louis Vega and Kenny Dope Gonzalez, brought a real sophistication later on.
Are there specific tracks that just scream early house?
Definitely. Chicago. Jesse Saunders, On and On. Marshall Jefferson's Move Your Body, the house music anthem. Farley Jackmaster, Funk's Love Can't Turn Around. Steve Silk, Hurley's Jack Your Body. Acid, Future's Acid Tracks, hands down. Deep, Mr. Fingers, Can You Feel It? Or Mystery of Love. Garage, maybe something like Visuals, The Music Got Me.
Was it mostly about singles, or were there important albums too?
House has always been very singles-focused, especially early on. But some early albums and compilations were really influential. Mr. Finger's Amnesia, Fingers Inc.'s Another Side, which included Larry Heard, Robert Owens, Ron Wilson, Frankie Knuckles Beyond the Mix, Larry Heard's Sceneries Not Songs, Vol. 1. And those compilations on Chicago labels like Trax Records and DJ International were vital for spreading the sound. Much later, Daft Punk's homework obviously owed a huge debt to this era.
And you keep coming back to the cultural roots that Black and LGBTQ plus communities.
It's impossible to overstate. Places like the Warehouse, Paradise Garage, they weren't just clubs, they were sanctuaries. They fostered this incredible ethos of liberation, inclusion, finding joy together on the dance floor. That spirit is embedded in the music, in the often positive lyrics. It really laid the groundwork for things like the PLUR, peace, love, unity, respect, ideal in later rave culture.
And the tech side. You mentioned happy accidents.
Yeah, that's a constant theme. The TV303's squelch in Acid House wasn't what the machine was designed for at all. Producers just pushed it until it did something weird and wonderful. The TR-808 was a commercial flop initially, designed to replace drummers realistically, which it didn't. But artists heard something unique in its synthesized sounds. It shows how creativity often comes from misusing or hacking the technology.
And the connection across the Atlantic was already strong with house.
Oh yes, house landed hard in Europe, especially the UK and Germany. It got reinterpreted, fused with local sounds. Acid House becoming the soundtrack to the UK rave explosion is the prime example. And later, UK Garage evolved directly from US Garage House influences. That back and forth, that cross-pollination just accelerated everything.
Okay, from the soul of house in Chicago and New York, we head north to Detroit for techno. From Detroit's industrial heartbeat to global phenomenon. Another huge moment.
Absolutely massive. Techno emerges from Detroit in the mid-1980s, carving out its own unique, incredibly influential path.
And Detroit itself. The city's atmosphere was key.
Undeniably. Detroit is the birthplace. The sound was pioneered by three figures known as the Belleville Three: Juan Atkins, Derek May, and Kevin Saunderson. They absorbed all these influences: Kraftwerk, YMO, electro like Bombada, Chicago House, but also science fiction. Writers like Alvin Toffler.
Third wave, right.
Exactly. Their music really reflected Detroit's environment, the post-industrial decline, the history of car manufacturing and technology, a sense of urban decay, but also technological aspiration. That Afrofuturist element was strong here, too.
And unlike house, techno seemed to connect with Europe almost immediately.
It did find a very receptive audience there early on. The UK, Germany, especially Berlin after the wall fell, Belgium, the Netherlands.
Yeah.
That 1988 compilation, Techno, the new dance sound of Detroit, released in the UK, was pivotal. It literally named the genre for many Europeans. Clubs like Trezor in Berlin became crucial links, bringing Detroit artists over.
So that transatlantic feedback loop was built in from the start. What defines the sound of early techno? How is it different from house?
Techno is generally more instrumental. The focus is really on rhythm and texture over traditional melody or vocals, which are pretty rare. Tempo is typically a bit faster than house, often 120 to 150 BPM, sometimes even higher in harder styles.
Still four on the floor.
Usually, yes, that steady 44 kick is common. But early Detroit techno could have quite complex syncopation, polyrhythms woven in. Instrumentally, heavy reliance on electronics. TR-808, TR-909, sequencers, synths like the TV303 again, the Roland SH-101. Sound synthesis creating unique electronic timbres was really key.
Minimal melody.
Often minimal or even absent. The interest comes from repetitive sequences, shifting textures, timbral changes. The early Detroit stuff could have these beautiful ethereal string pads or jazzy chords, showing its soulful roots. The mood varies hugely: futuristic, mechanical, industrial, dystopian, reflecting Detroit, but also soulful, emotional, hypnotic. Juan Atkins famously described it as music that sounds like technology, not the other way around.
And like house, techno quickly develops subgenres.
Right away. You had Detroit techno itself, that original blend, funk soul meets electronics, Afrofuturist themes, that melancholic but aspiring feel. Then minimal techno emerged in the early 90s, partly as a reaction to complexity, stripped down, raw, hypnotic repetition, subtle changes.
Yep.
Robert Hood was key here.
Acid techno, similar to acid house.
Shares the TV303 squelch, definitely. But acid techno tends to be harder, faster, more intense than acid house. Driving rhythms, psychedelic feel, think hard floor or some Aphex Twin tracks. And industrial techno fused techno's pulse with the harsh, noisy sounds of early industrial bands like Cabaret Voltaire or Throbbing Gristle. Dark, distorted, aggressive.
It's useful seeing those laid out, how quickly it diversified. Who are the absolute key architects of early techno?
Detroit techno.
Yeah.
Let's start with the Belleville 3, Juan Atkins, also his Model 500, Cybertron. Derek May, Rhythm is Rhythm. Kevin Saunderson, often more commercially successful with Intercity. Other crucial early figures, Eddie Fowlkes, Blake Baxter, then the second wave, Jeff Mills, Robert Hood, Carl Craig. Underground Resistance, Mad Mike Banks, Mills, Hood were hugely influential musically and politically.
And for the subgenres,
Minimal. Richie Houghton as Plastic Man, Daniel Bell, Robert Hood, all with Detroit roots, though Houghton is Canadian and Minimal developed heavily in Berlin too. Basic Channel and Berlin were pioneers of minimal and dub techno. Acid techno. DJ Pierre's roots are in acid house, but people like Hard Floor really defined acid techno. Aphex Twin touched on it. Industrial techno. Early Jeff Mills, Surgeon from the UK.
any must-hear tracks or albums that define early techno?
Seminal tracks. Cybertron's Alleys of Your Mind and Clear. Model 500's No UFOs, often called the first techno record. Rhythm is Rhythm's Strings of Life, iconic. Intercity's Big Fun or Good Life, big crossover hits. Jeff Mills' The Bells, a later but defining anthem. Influential albums. Cybertron's Enter. Carl Craig's More Songs About Food and Revolutionary Art. Derek May's compilation Innovator. Model 500's Deep Space for Minimal. Plastic Man Sheet 1 or Music. Robert Hood's Minimal Nation. Basic Channel's BZD compilation Acid. Maybe Hard Floor's TB Resuscitation. Industrial. Jeff Mills' Waveform Transmissions Vol. 1. And Aphex Twin's Selected Ambient Works 8592, while broader, is essential listening in this sphere.
Wow. Okay, so we've traced this incredible journey from those first avant-garde electronic experiments through the dance floor revolutions of disco, synth-pop, electro-funk, and then the birth of these absolute pillars, house and techno. It's amazing seeing how technology, culture, and just that desire to connect and move shaped everything.
It really is. And hopefully you listening have a much clearer picture now of the distinct flavors, the key players, the crucial cultural context, especially those origins and marginalized communities that birthed these sounds we still feel today.
Yeah.
The whole story is such a testament to creativity, innovation, pushing boundaries.
Absolutely. So as you can hear, the story doesn't stop there. These foundational genres we've talked about today, they became the launch pad for countless other styles. Think about how those core rhythms, that spirit of experimentation, continues to echo through electronic music now.
Right. What new sounds are emerging? What future blueprints are being sketched out right now in studios and on dance floors worldwide?
It really feels like this deep dive is just scratching the surface. The possibilities keep expanding, truly limitless.